All right, here we go. Is this a Super Tuesday? Mainstream media is saying that it better be for Bernie Sanders or he's dead in the water. Give me a break. I'm about ready to throw up as a Sanders supporter with all the lopsided coverage that's out there. Good to have you with us on this Tuesday edition of Ed Schultz News and Commentary coming to you from the nation's capital. Of course, the big prize tonight is Michigan. 133 delegates are available. And then there's also Mississippi, which Clinton is supposed to win both of these states. Interesting piece that's put out by Common Dreams, breaking news and views for the progressive community. And it would seem to me that everybody in the progressive community or in that sphere would think that this is a pretty good piece of journalism, that it points out that the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos of Amazon, the Washington Post ran 16 negative stories on Bernie Sanders in 16 hours. Now, we all know what happened over the weekend. He won Maine, Nebraska, and Kansas. Hillary won Louisiana. She, of course, won more delegates because of the size of her victory in Louisiana, and they got more delegates down there. But the fact is, Bernie Sanders is doing quite well. So Michigan's a big play tonight, and the polls are closing. It's 52-47 if you want to pay attention to Michigan State's political science department, the last polling they've been doing. But to this story that I want to bring your attention to, some of the headlines. Starting on March 6th at 10:20 at night, Bernie Sanders pledges the United States won't be number one in incarceration. He'll need to release lots of criminals. That's the headline. Clinton is running for president. Sanders is doing something else. That's another headline. This is huge. Trump, Sanders using the same catchphrase. Mental health patients to Bernie Sanders. Don't compare us to the GOP candidates. Excuse me, I'm talking. Bernie Sanders shuts down Hillary Clinton repeatedly. I mean, there is a litany of headlines here that are all negative and to follow in the content of the stories. I always say follow the money. Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, they write that the editorial stance has been staunchly anti-Sanders, though the paper contends that its editorial board is entirely independent of both Bezos and the paper's news reporting. Well, I always say follow the money. Bezos, Amazon was awarded a $16.5 million contract with the State Department last year when the last year Clinton was running the State Department. Amazon also has a $600 million deal with the Central Intelligence Agency, and that, of course, is an organization that Bernie Sanders wanted to get abolished back in 1974, and he says now that, quote, he still has a problem with it. So whatever your definition of fair is, have at it. But this is just a snapshot example of what happens in the mainstream media. So we roll into Michigan. I'd like to wonder what kind of race it would be if Bernie Sanders, with his populist views, was to get this kind of slant. So Hillary goes out on the campaign trail yesterday, and she says that, well, she really wants, the sooner she locks up the nomination, the quicker she can turn to the Republicans. Really? As if we're not going to get enough of that between now and November? It's rather sickening. And what's going to happen here is that a lot of Sanders people are going to get pissed off. Now, would I vote for Hillary? Yes, I would, based on health care alone. Go to my website at wegoted.com and you'll see what I wrote this morning, 5 things I have to say today. And one of them is, yes, I would vote for Hillary Clinton based on the Affordable Care Act because our family fighting cancer, and, of course, if the Republicans get rid of the Affordable Care Act, then that means insurance companies would be able to drop people with a pre-existing condition. So that's kind of big for us. So just based on that, I'd vote for her. Ruth Conniff joins us from the Progressive Magazine. She'll be part of our coverage tonight on RT with the coverage of Michigan and Mississippi. Ruth, good to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Have you noticed a slant in coverage? I know that the Common Dreams pointed out what the Washington Post did, but just based on what you have seen, do you feel like there's a bend in the road somewhere?
I think that it's been the case all along that people saw Hillary Clinton as the real candidate because she is the institutional favorite, because she has a lot of money, because people see her as not this come from behind, scruffy, more populist, progressive candidate. And so I think there's been kind of a leaning in that direction. And I think that where there was a bump in the road is that it started to look like 2008 when Sanders ran her to a tie in Iowa when she was really struggling, and that for the Washington Post and other outlets that really look at this from a kind of professional political point of view, which is really different from a grassroots point of view. The question was, is Hillary just really weak? It was never, is Sanders really the exciting phenomenon that he is to voters. So I think it's been a struggle. It's been a struggle, I think, also because especially in this year of Trump, we get a lot of personality politics. We get a lot of kind of very light coverage and not a lot of digging into what are the policy positions here and what does it really mean to elect Sanders versus Clinton. And so, that's been, that's just kind of the nature of the coverage. But, it's significant to talk about sexism in this race, and so I don't want to dismiss it out of hand. But things like that, the interrupting during the debate, so much less important and interesting to voters than whether the auto bailout and the Wall Street bailout are the same thing, and whether it's a fair critique of Sanders to say that he voted against the auto bailout when actually he voted for it, and when she's talking about a prior vote that was a Wall Street bailout that ended up being tied to the financing. It's just, this is not the right kind of coverage for really getting at what voters' real concerns are.
Okay, I do want to ask you, excuse me, I'm talking Bernie Sanders shuts down Hillary Clinton. There was a narrative out there that he was being rude. I mean, I want your take on how did you take that? Was he out of line?
No, I really don't think so. I think it's totally normal, standard, let me finish kind of debate, crosstalk, and I just don't buy that. I do think there's been a lot of sexist coverage of Hillary Clinton. I don't think it's coming from Sanders. I think it's, it's the way our culture is, but I really don't think that was a big deal.
What about, Tad Devine told me on this production just a few days ago that they think they can win the entire West. They can win Washington, Oregon, California, play in Arizona. And if that happens, in other words, they're still figuring on a path to victory in a big way, even if things don't go very well tonight in Michigan. And I think they're going to go a lot better than what the polls are showing. And, of course, it being proportional in the Democratic primaries, everybody walks away with something. Yeah. Bernie doesn't have to win Michigan. He's just got to show well. How do you see this unfolding?
Well, I think Michigan's important for delegates, and I think it's also important because it's really the heart of the decimation of the middle class and manufacturing in America, and that is the critical part of Bernie Sanders' message. So I think Bernie Sanders needs to do well in Michigan for two reasons. He needs to keep piling up those delegates, and there is still a path to the nomination for him. This is not over. And as you point out, unlike the Republican Party, the Democrats continue to proportionally assign delegates all the way to the convention. So he can still do this thing. Plus, the superdelegates do not have to stay attached to Hillary if they don't think she's going to win. And in head-to-head competition, Sanders actually beats more Republican candidates than Clinton does. So that's significant. Those Trump voters are resonating to Bernie Sanders. They're going to be resonating to either Trump or Sanders in Michigan, many of them. So I think all of that is important. And the other piece that I think is really important for tonight is to think about how black voters are responding to Sanders and whether he's putting together, and this is so imminently doable for him, and he needs to get there, the plight of African Americans who have been hit the hardest by the collapse of manufacturing and outsourcing of jobs and privatization like the Flint water disaster, and his general message to white and black voters alike about economic collapse in the middle class. He's got to kind of make that pitch and connect it more specifically to black voters in Michigan and places like Detroit. And that's, this is where he didn't achieve it during the debate in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is sort of the epicenter of this stuff. And I think he's got to pull that together, and he's struggled a bit with that.
Ruth Conniff, we'll see you tonight on RT's coverage. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
You bet. Ruth Conniff, Progressive Magazine editor. John Nichols joins us. PillPack, Communication Workers for America, Alliance for American Manufacturing, BioGreen Clean, and the iSave team bringing this production. We're right back. I recently discovered PillPack. It's a full-service pharmacy that takes care of everything for me. They pre-sort and deliver all my medications and vitamins in easy-to-tear packets, labeled with the date and time for each dose. Their pharmacists are available 24/7, and they manage all of my refills. They'll do the same for you. They even made sure my insurance was compatible before they transferred my medications over. It's unbelievable how much better my life has been since I switched to PillPack. Hey folks, you've heard me talk about BioGreen Clean. I'm going to show you right now on my airplane just how tough this is. I want you to keep in mind,
chemical-free, 100% plant-derived, biodegradable. It is the safest cleaner that you can get, and it's the most effective. Go to our website, wegoted.com, or go to biogreenclean.com. www.biogreenclean and order today.
It's time to continue our conversation about mechanical insulation. Mechanical insulation is for the piping systems in our nation's commercial and industrial facilities. Facility owners are burning up billions of dollars through the lack of mechanical insulation on these piping systems. Call the iSave team. Insulation saves America valuable energy, and this team of energy conservation specialists is shovel-ready to save you money. Visit iSaveTeam.org to have a specialist give your plant an energy audit.
We perpetuate a culture of crime all the way from Wall Street right down to the main street in our hometowns. It's worse than it has been since FDR took control of the problem and said we can't count on industry taking care of the American labor. They probably have already engaged into some type of criminal cover-up, and the law prohibits the government from even doing anything about it.
Catch America's lawyer Mike Papantonio on YouTube at youtube.com/GoLeftTV.
You can go to my website at wegoted.com. Ed says 5 things for Tuesday morning. One of them, for Hillary Rodham Clinton to claim Sanders didn't support the auto program that saved the industry is like saying he didn't get arrested for advocating for minority rights. Clinton ground game in Michigan gets grandiose, saying the sooner they win the nomination, the quicker they can attack the Republicans. In other words, we don't respect Bernie, so just be done with it. 2 of the things. You can get it at wegoted.com, rawstory.com, and ringofireradio.com. And I also say that if Clinton gets a nomination, I would vote for it based on health care alone. All right, John Nichols, Washington correspondent of The Nation, with us here on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. All right, John, how is Michigan going to play? The polls are closing for Sanders, but it still looks like that strong African-American presence and loyalty in that voting bloc towards the Clintons are going to have a big play tonight. What do you think?
Well, I think that Michigan was always a very, very good state for Hillary Clinton. In fact, if you look at the polls from over the last few, not just the last few months, but even the last few weeks, and she had a tremendous lead there. And so the question really is, what does Bernie Sanders do? How close does he make it? I think there's clear indications from the Clinton folks that they think it's gotten pretty close. I mean, why else do this whole line on the auto bailout, which was, really kind of just a wild last-minute move, except that thinking that there is something in play there. Now, the dynamics of Michigan are complex because it is a state with a big Democratic base, but it's also a state where people, you can take a Democratic or a Republican ballot. You can vote either side. And one of the things that I think is in play in Michigan today, or at least worth keeping an eye on, is, I think there are some Democrats that are going to be voting in that Republican primary, or some Democratic-leaning independents that are going to be voting over there.
Well, I want to ask you about that.
Yeah.
You got Trump. He seems to appeal to that union crowd. Those guys that want to beat China, those guys that hate the trade agreement, and who are comfortable with the stance on firearms. I think that Bernie was spot on the other night when he was talking about the gun manufacturers. I could do hours on that, but I'll stay on this thought right here. Trump has an appeal to blue-collar workers that we haven't seen from the Republicans in a long time, John.
Well, there's no doubt of that. I mean, he's played that out. It's something that he has clearly telegraphed that he will make a big part of a November campaign if he is nominated. Now, that's going to be a great challenge for the unions. They're going to have to counter it, and I think they'll be able to in many fronts. But here's the interesting dynamic in Michigan right now. You don't have the major unions, the UAW, the steelworkers, out there pushing for one candidate or the other on the Democratic side.
No.
They're not doing that major mobilization.
Yeah.
What that means is that then some workers, they're kind of just looking at what they're seeing on TV, where the action is, and might some of them go and vote in a Republican primary? That's very possible. And also, might some progressives who are really, genuinely concerned about Trump, think he's a very dangerous player. Might some of them go and vote for John Kasich? Kasich's on the rise there on the Republican side. I think that's true. The only reason we're talking about this is because you asked your initial good question about Sanders and, how Sanders will do. I think some of those things have the potential to impact the numbers we see. I also think it's absolutely true, as you say, African-American community, I think, in Michigan is going to be pretty strong for Hillary Clinton. Although I will note that at the Sanders rallies in Michigan, you have seen African-Americans doing introductions and being a real presence there, as well as Arab Americans, which are a very big voting bloc. So I think it's going to be significant tonight to look at those patterns. I mean, I wouldn't debate for a second that Hillary Clinton has a tremendous advantage, one that's rooted in long experience and some real connections there to particularly the African-American community. But I'm going to be interested in seeing some of those totals. And so the exit polls tonight become very, very significant in addition to that final figure. At the end of the day, I try to veer away from, election day punditry because it's a dangerous game. Somebody might actually remember what you said. But, my sense is that Sanders will do significantly better than those polls that show him, that have, even in recent days, showed him way behind. I think he'll narrow the gap tremendously. Whether he could get a victory there, I mean, that's a real challenge. And certainly it would be an incredible come-from-behind victory, or come-from-behind move. But here's the important thing. Bernie Sanders is a guy, so far in this race, that a lot of the media and political elites, they just desperately want to write him off. They desperately want to say that the race is done.
It's gross.
Yeah, but he keeps messing him up because every time that they write him off, right? They say, "Oh well, he got only 48% there. He got only 49%. He didn't win. It's all over." Then a couple days later, he pulls a win out of someplace you didn't expect. And so, the reality of this Democratic race is that Sanders has a very loyal base of supporters.
Sure does.
And Politico had an article.
I don't think they're Hillary motivated either. I think it'll be a problem down the road, but go ahead.
Well, but Politico had a really fascinating story today in which they said, they went to a lot of Sanders backers, and they said, if he doesn't do well in Michigan or doesn't do well in Ohio, something like that, should he get out? And to a one, they said, no, the issues he's raising are important. And, if you look at the map, if you look at where this thing is going, here's the interesting thing, Ed. After March 15th, you start to have tons of states where, if the patterns we have seen so far hold, Bernie Sanders could win.
There's no
Bernie
question.
Sanders win a lot of these caucuses and primaries? Yes.
No doubt. John Nichols, always great to visit. Big day in politics in America with Mississippi, and, of course, the big prize is Michigan. We'll have full coverage tonight on RT. John, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Great to be with you, Ed.
You bet. Washington correspondent of The Nation. I do want to give a quick comment on this story that the NRA has commented about Bernie Sanders having the correct position on the gun manufacturers. And I want you to think about this. If we're going to go after the gun manufacturers, and let's just lay it out there, they are performing a legal activity in America. In other words, they're allowed to make the firearms. Just like Ford and GM and Chrysler, they're allowed to make vehicles. And people die in vehicles. People get drunk and they drive these vehicles. And I haven't seen in a DUI or an accident where someone's life was taken because of alcohol that GM is responsible, or anybody who even made the automobile is responsible. And so if you want to go after the gun manufacturers, you need to realize that this is a real slippery slope. And it is a behavioral issue. It's what you do with a legalized product. Now, if you want to make guns not legal anymore, that's a different thing. But to go after the manufacturers in America where they are producing a legal product, I think that it is a real slippery slope, and it's the wrong way to curb gun violence in this country. And I think Hillary Clinton is off her rocker on this. And I also think that Bernie Sanders, he asked the question at the debate, if this is what you're talking about, then this is the end of gun manufacturing in America. And if that's what you want, I guess that's what you want. It's not what I want. This is Ed Schultz News and Commentary. We're back tomorrow.